In the tomb of Tutankhamun, Howard Carter found this gold stick or scepter surmounted by the appealing figure of the king as a young boy. He is shown coming forth from his coronation in heaven, where the crown has just been affixed by the divine hands. His own hands are shown in a suppliant pose, not yet grasping the scepters. This is a very rare and realistic example in ancient art of a person represented as a child. The usual convention in ancient Egypt is to show infants as adults on a miniature scale. But with his disproportionately large head and eyes, Tutankhamun clearly appears here as the new infant king. In his case, the myth corresponds to reality, since he wasn't more than 9 years old when he came to the throne. How could the land of Egypt be governed by so young, so immature a person, even though his words were considered to be divinely inspired?
It was the officials of the palace, a sort of privy council, who helped King Tutankhamun to govern. In his tomb they are represented as wearing their white mourning bands, faithful to the end, hauling the catafalque of their dead lord on his last journey to the west. Among them are the two viziers, recognizable by their shaven heads, their gowns upheld by a halter. In the tomb of the vizier Ramosa, who died about 6 years before Tutankhamun was born, the funeral procession is headed by the household servants. Then come the mourners, and they are followed by the retainers carrying their master's possessions, such as his chair, his caskets, and his bed. At the rear walk the Viceroy of Nubia, the King's first herald, the Chief Steward of the Treasury, and other dignitaries. These offices still existed at the time of Tutankhamun. In the 3rd millennium BC, the early pharaohs were buried in simple tombs beneath rectangular mud brick mounds. Even at that time they ruled with the aid of high officials, who've left traces of their existence in the impress which they made by rolling carved stone cylinders over clay, the equivalent of our modern rubber stamp. Many of these official seals give the names of early kings, in whose name the officials acted. The highest position under the king appears to have been the chancellor and his staff of scribes who were in charge of the treasury. They were largely concerned with controlling all the products of the land. From this developed a well-organized system of taxation which was the basis of prosperity in Egypt. The growing of food, the raising of crops and herds were all dependent upon the cultivation of the fields, and that in turn on the control of the Nile waters. So it comes as no surprise to find that many of these early officials bore the title of canal digger. They were empowered to conscript labor for the massive irrigation works that were renewed each year to make the most of the life-giving waters. By about 2800 BC, the few administrators that we know by name, such as Ka-Bau-Sokka, were practical experts largely concerned with constructional works. It was at Memphis, where the pharaohs lived, that the first mighty works were achieved. The earliest great architect that we know of was the Chancellor Imhotep. In later ages he was deified as the patron god of architects, physicians, and intellectuals. His chief memorial today, however, is the step pyramid complex that he constructed for his king. These great enterprises were only achieved by the competent organization of labor, which was in the hands of the king's chief ministers. It was this effective use of manpower that enabled Imhotep to raise the world's first building of any size. He translated into stone a form of architecture that originally had developed from constructions in wood, papyrus, reeds, and mud brick. Imhotep was the high priest of the sun god Re of Heliopolis, whose priests were foremost as the thinkers and the wise men of Egypt at all periods. They were particularly concerned with astronomy, time measurement, and mathematics. This knowledge suited them for the post of master of the king's works, such as this early official Rehotep, who was the son of a pharaoh. It was men like these who built the first true pyramids. These great solar symbols were erected with precise orientation and mathematical accuracy. In the Fourth Dynasty, the great age of pyramid building, it seems to have been the belief that those who had royal blood in their veins were best fitted to govern. Many of the king's sons were active in this function. Notable among them was Ankh-Haf, who held the important position of vizier, from now onwards the king's chief minister of state. He served Khephren, the builder of the second pyramid at Giza. This is an earlier vizier, Hem-On, who was probably responsible for the organization required to raise the Great Pyramid at Giza. Both men were laid to rest in tombs under the shadows of the pyramids they raised for their kings. The portrait heads of these officials and their wives give an impression of the calm confidence and latent vigor with which they undertook the mighty works of this pyramid age. Just below the ruined pyramid of King Teti of the Sixth Dynasty is the tomb of his chief minister, Mereruka. He has a large tomb complex with many chambers to show his importance, almost as great as that of the king himself. The walls are decorated with fine reliefs on a lavish scale. On the causeway leading to the pyramid of King Wenis is a relief depicting some of these officials. However powerful they may have been, they are nevertheless shown bowing deferentially in the presence of their pharaoh. They represent the court at Memphis. In the provinces, the local governors showed greater independence. They handed on their offices to their sons in the Egyptian tradition, even though such appointments had to be approved by the king at Memphis. These are some of the tombs of those provincial governors. This feudal pattern persisted into the next era, when the warlike and ruthless princes of the southern city of Thebes seized the throne. Their savage and provincial style of art was soon succeeded by the high culture of the 12th dynasty, as exemplified in this statue of King Sesostris I. It was his great-grandson who replaced the feudal governors by a bureaucracy of local officials. But this system was not to last long, and a papyrus written about a century later bewails the increasing anarchy of the age. Eventually, the military state of the new kingdom restored the bureaucrats to power. Many of these were related to the king. Some were intimates, their mothers having been wet nurses of the royal children. One of the chief offices was that of overseer of the granaries, whose responsibility was the measuring, harvesting, recording, and storage of the annual crops of wheat and barley. There were many other court posts, such as the master of the horse, private secretaries, butlers, and fan-bearers. The title fan-bearer on the right of the king was claimed as an honorary position by the highest officers in the land. The actual attendants who carried the state sunshades were often Nubians. A new post was the Viceroy of Kush, the deputy appointed by the king to rule Nubia and the Sudan in his name. One of them, Hui, was viceroy in the reign of Tutankhamun, and the paintings in his tomb at Thebes show the tribute that he gathered for the king. Nubians are shown bringing gold, cattle, a giraffe, minerals, and furniture. Among the gifts are parade shields, similar to those found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. Another important official in the new kingdom was the high priest of Amun, whose temple at Karnak received enormous gifts and endowments from grateful pharaohs. Such wealth fell into the hands of the high priests, who became so important that they were represented on the same scale as the king. But the supreme official under the king was still the vizier. At this period, however, there were two, one serving in Upper and the other in Lower Egypt. The vizier Rekhmire has left in his tomb an account of his duties and appointments. Every morning he is to greet the pharaoh and report the state of the nation to him.
He is to enter the great house as soon as the chief treasurer shall have taken his stance by the northern column. As soon as the vizier appears at the portal, the chief treasurer is to advance and meet him, saying these words: "All your affairs are safe and sound, and the royal estate is safe and sound."
He also delivered judgments in his audience chamber, and received and issued instructions to the various branches of government. He was chiefly concerned with the collection of taxes in Upper or Lower Egypt. These were delivered in kind by the headmen of the various towns. Produce of all kinds was brought, such as cattle, grain, gold in rings, honey, and linen. The vizier also received foreign embassies who brought gifts to the king on great occasions. In this case, the peoples of Nubia and the Sudan bring a baboon, logs of ebony, cheetahs, skins, a giraffe, and ivory tusks. At his advent, Tutankhamun was too young to have any contemporaries that he could appoint to office, and his officials were men who had already served his predecessor. The Privy Council that are represented in his tomb are not named, but some of them can be identified and their careers traced in part. Nearest the catafalque, and therefore the most important of the palace officials, is a man who walks alone. He is almost certainly Horemheb, the deputy at the head of the army, who claims to have guided the king's footsteps on the battlefield. He is shown in his own tomb being decorated with gold collars in the presence of Tutankhamun. He had married Mut Najmi, a sister of Queen Nefertiti, and this had probably brought him into prominence at court. To him was given the job of reforming the administration of the army, and he was to ascend the throne himself some 5 years after this scene was painted. He is preceded by the 2 viziers of Upper and Lower Egypt. One of them is known. He is Pentu, who had begun his career as the king's physician. He had a fair-sized tomb at Amarna that is now in a greatly dilapidated state. He gave a jar of wine for the burial of his king. Another official in the retinue was the general Nakht Min. He is shown here with his wife. He gave 5 handsome Shawabti figures for the king's burial. This is one of them. There was one high official who was not in that cortege. He was Ai, the former vizier and regent, probably the uncle of Tutankhamun. Since Tutankhamun had no children, the royal line was now extinct. So in his old age, Ai had to assume the crown and carry out the last rites for the dead king.